Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my new video. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how Iran has shattered the myth of Israel's invincible Iron Dome and how China helped doing that. I'm also going to discuss how Iran is very important to China in terms of geopolitics and what China's role will be to protect Iran from being toppled. So let's start with Israel's Iron Dome. As you can see from the last couple of weeks, Iran has absolutely shattered the myth of Iron Dome. Iron Dome might be good against Hamas rockets, which are like fireworks, to be honest. Let's be real here. And Hamas rockets are very slow. They do not have that much explosives, and the Iron Dome deals with that very easily. Compare that with hypersonics that's coming out of Iran. They have absolutely no chance whatsoever. So things have changed over the last very recent past. China and Iran has actually signed a deal, around $400 billion deal a few years ago. And this deal included China helping Iran in infrastructure. They would help Iran with technology, and they would also help Iran's military as well. And they would give a lot of technology transfers. He also included Iran having access to China's Beidou navigation system as well. So all of that in return for China buying cheap Iranian oil. So that was a deal. So since then, Iranian missile technology has moved up 10 gears because now with Chinese Beidou system navigation, Iran can pinpoint these missiles to hit specific targets, which they couldn't do before. And why did China move to the Beidou navigation system? Because it was during the second and the third Taiwanese crisis. They call it the Taiwanese crisis. It was a time when Taiwan was taking steps to become independent. And what China did, they were throwing a few missiles at Taiwan as a warning shot, not to destroy the country, but as a warning to show that, China was serious about Taiwan not becoming independent. And at the time, American military might was the strongest in the world. There was no competitor whatsoever. And Taiwan's military was pretty much on a par with Chinese military because at the time, Taiwanese military had all the latest American gadgets and weapons and things like that. So China threw a few missiles, and these missiles were using GPS at the time. And guess what happened? Americans switched off the GPS on those missiles, and those missiles basically fell hopelessly into the water. So that's when the Chinese decided to have their own navigation, Baidu, because they could not rely on the GPS for their missile guidance anymore. So they built their Baidu, took them, a good decade or so, and now the Baidu system, satellite system, is much more accurate than the GPS system. So Iranians are using the Baidu system, and one thing the Americans cannot do is switch off the Beidou system mid-flight, and this is what's really scaring the Americans because they cannot control these missiles, they cannot take them down, and they cannot jam them. And the fact that so many of these missiles, Iranian missiles, have hit Tel Aviv, absolutely destroyed Tel Aviv, only and the tactic worked. First they were throwing a few slow moving missiles. These were missiles that Iranians have been building since the 60s and 70s. So they got rid of all of their inventories of slow moving missiles. They even could be like decoys as well. They could be just decoys with no warheads. They were just basically flying blind towards Tel Aviv. And once the Israeli dome missiles get exhausted trying to take down these slow-moving missiles, a few hypersonic missiles suddenly come out of nowhere and hit Tel Aviv or Haifa in great force, doing tons of damage. So again, the West has underestimated Iran and its capabilities and its, technology that it's acquired from China. And also with the hypersonic missiles, you need certain parts they can only get from China. China, as well as the US, has the largest testing facilities for hypersonic missiles. They have wind tunnels, which are faster than the US, where these hypersonic missiles are tested, the engines are tested. So Iran gets a lot of the engine parts, hypersonic missile parts, and also you need a lot of rare earths as well. They get those from China, and they're able to build hypersonic missiles from that. So again, the West has completely underestimated Iran, and Trump was panicking. I mean, you can see from his tweets. One day Trump was sending out tweets saying unconditional surrender from Iran. Iran is losing. Israel is winning this war. Israel wants nothing but an unconditional surrender. We want regime change. He was actually calling for regime change. And then once Iran started smacking Israel with lots of these hypersonic missiles, it was actually the Israelis that went to America calling for a ceasefire. They were saying, please, please, do a ceasefire. We cannot take it anymore. So Trump had no choice but to force a ceasefire. If Israel was winning, if Israel was destroying Iran and Iran was calling for a ceasefire, Trump would say no. He would say no way, absolutely no way. Let them get hammered. Let Iran get destroyed. That's what he would have said. The fact that Israel got hammered and was getting destroyed, that's when he called for a ceasefire. So I wanted to say calling for a ceasefire is actually benefiting Israel more than it's benefiting Iran. And the reason is the West has got a history of calling for a ceasefire when things go against them and then coming back later on with a bigger force. And you can look back in history, like when Israel fought the Arab countries. Arab countries at one time when they were fighting against Israel were winning. They they pushed back the Israelis many times and they were winning the war. And then the Israelis called for a ceasefire. And during that ceasefire, Israelis used to stock up on more American weapons. And once they've stocked up, they used to go for round two. And in round two, they used to win. And throughout history, uh, the West has done that. You look at Ukraine when Russia was, kicking Ukraine's ass um, in 2014 when they took Crimea. And they had a chance to completely destroy Ukraine. They didn't. They agreed to a Minsk agreements 1 and 2. They agreed to a ceasefire. And during that time, during those 10 years, NATO pumped Ukraine full of weapons, trained the Ukrainian soldiers up. And now the fight with Russia is much harder. And if Russia finished the job in 2014, they wouldn't have to lose so many soldiers they have now. Same in Syria. There was a time when ISIS was pushed back all the way to Idlib. You had the Iranian forces, the Russian forces, and the Syrian forces push. They had a chance to win the war. They had a chance to finish off ISIS and al-Jalani in Idlib. And they called for a ceasefire, and the Americans called for a ceasefire at the time, and Assad agreed. And unfortunately, 10 years later, you see the result. They basically stocked up on weapons, stocked up on training. They learned a lot of drone training from Ukrainians, and they used all the latest weapons, and they basically steamrolled their way to take the rest of Syria. That's what they did. So ceasefires are always Western Um, it's always a Western thing when they lose, but it's always for their benefit. However, Iranians can still take full advantage of this ceasefire. And I think if they take full advantage, they should have the advantage if Israel attacks again. For example, if Iranians use this time to buy Chinese jets, for example, the Iranian defense minister, he's in China right now, and he's looking at Chinese jets, the J-10Cs, J-10Es, and PL-15 long-range missiles and anti-aircraft HQ-19 and HQ-10s, I believe. So he is looking at that. So hopefully he buys a lot of that. There's no waiting with China. China has these equipment and missiles and jets readily available to sell right now, and they could get delivery pretty much straight away. So if Iran uses this time to buy the necessary equipment, jets, and anti-aircraft from China, they can take full advantage of this ceasefire, and they can also buy more, hypersonic missile equipment, rare earths, all the missile engines that they need, all the missile components that they need to build more missiles from China. They could do that in this time. And I think Iran should be ready if a second war with Israel happens over the next few months, say. So, why is Iran important to China? For many reasons. First of all, China will never get involved in any wars outside its borders because China has a long, no, it does not get involved in other people's wars, non-alignment. A non-alignment understanding with other countries. China has a civilization for over 5,000 years, and they've never aligned themselves militarily with other nations. It's not what they do, and they've never done that, and that will never change. However, they will provide necessary military equipment to their friends and neighbors, and they will provide a force, voluntary force, if needed. China will never say we, officially joined this war or anything like that. I mean, this is what they've done in Korea. There was a voluntary force joined in Korea, and they were helping the North Koreans as a proxy, more like a proxy rather than a direct war. And this is what they're going to do with Iran. I think they will help Iran, and they have been helping Iran. There were lots of military Chinese jets going into Iran during the time of the war with Israel. And there's also a train link going from China to Iran. And they have no idea what's in those trains. There could be any cargo in those trains. So China will be helping Iran for many reasons. Number one, Iran is a very important Belt and Road partner. There are going to be train links going from China through Iran into into Turkey and into Europe. China has a northern line going via Russia, but the Europeans do not like that. Europeans do not want any goods coming out of Russia. In fact, they have sanctioned Russia, so there's no trains that go from Russia into Europe. So that's a bit of a problem for China. So the only other way China can do this is if there's trains that go through Iran, and and I believe that's going through, and it's very important for China for that to happen. And it's very important for Iran to be Chinese, under the Chinese influence, for that to happen as well. So that's number one. Number two, Iran gives China cheap oil as well. And, in this day and age, cheap oil makes all the difference. 90% of Iranian oil goes to China. However, they don't buy all their oil from Iran. They also buy it from the open market, from Saudi Arabia, from Canada, United States as well. But 90% of Iran oil goes into China, and this oil is not traded in US dollars. It's traded in, the Chinese renminbi or Chinese yuan. and that's a really good benefit for China. Um, and number three, which is very important, which is just as important as the other two, is Iran is like Iran is like, how would you say, a barrier to protect China from growing threats from that part of the country coming into China. So, for example, Russia is a very good barrier for China as a and it, and Russia protects China from the growing threats of NATO. And you can see NATO's language. NATO s- is openly calling China an enemy, and they see China as a threat. And if it wasn't for Russia, you would see NATO expanding into Asia, and you would see lots of Asian countries joining the Asian NATO and surrounding China and causing all sorts of problems. And Russia is actually protecting China from the growing NATO threat. And I think Russia is doing a great service for China. And this is why China supports Russia in what it's doing. And China is pretty much supporting and Russia militarily. They're providing them with what they need, drones, whatever they need, and they're also giving them diplomatic cover as well. And Iran would do the same for China for all the threats coming out of that part of the world. And the main threat coming from that part of the world is Israel. And Israel has openly said China is an enemy to them as well. China is an enemy to them because China supports the Palestinian state. China supports Iran, their enemy. China supports the Greater Middle East. China supports their financial system because Israel owns the world financial system, and China is a threat to that. Many reasons why. So I mean, the Jews want to control the world, right? And Chinese are a big problem to the Jews because the Chinese are firstly not religious, so the Jews cannot brainwash them like they brainwashed the Americans. You can see Americans, even all the congressmen are they all brainwashed. They all say, "Oh, if you bless Israel, God will bless you," and all this crap. The Jews have completely infiltrated the Christianity in America and replaced it with Zionism. So lots of Christians in America are basically Christian Zionists. They cannot do that in China. They cannot brainwash China the same way. They cannot control China's Congress because China, the CCP or CPC, should I say, is controlled by Xi Jinping, and all the CPC members are basically chosen, and these people are chosen based on how good, you know, all the achievements they've done throughout their years. So it's not based on your blood, your ethnicity, how much money you have, influence, or anything like that. It's based on merit. So Xi Jinping has, gone to the top due to merit, all his achievements that he's done throughout his life, and he's worked his way to the top. And same with all the other CPC members as well. So, so obviously the Jews cannot infiltrate Congress like they have with the American Congress. You can see 90% or 98% of Congress is owned by AIPAC. AIPAC is a Jewish lobby, and they pretty much paid all the Congress members, whether you're Republican or Democrat, they're all under the Jewish, you know, blanket. I think there's only one or two Congress members who are not, you know, um, owned by AIPAC. Thomas Massey is one of them, and there's a few others as well. So this is why China cannot allow Iranians to fall or Iran to fall for various reasons, for various reasons like that. And I think China will help Iran and make sure it doesn't get toppled because Iran is a very good barrier from the evil Israeli empire that's growing at the moment, and Russia is a very good barrier for um, the NATO group that's trying to attack China as well. So it's in China's interest to not only protect Russia but also to protect Iran. And if they can share technology with Iran, they will do that. Whichever way China can help Iran, they will do that. Because if Iran becomes strong, then Iran would, do all the stuff in the Middle East based on China's interests. Because it's in China's interest to have a state of Palestine, and they have said that many times. They want a state of Palestine. Palestine should be free. And I think China knows if they can make Iran strong, Iran and China have the same, principles in the Middle East. They want a free Middle East. They want a free state of Palestine. They want all the puppets out of the Middle East. They want all the military bases out of the Middle East. So if Iran becomes strong and they become just as strong as Israel in the Middle East, they become a very good counter to Israel in the Middle East, and you will see a lot of countries moving more towards Iran rather than Israel. So those are the goals, really. I'll end it there. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care for now. Bye.